Well, hi there. Oh, man. What a day. I'm going to do the usual Bentley babbles about nonsensical things to let folks get in here. For whoever will abandon the Corey stream, or maybe he's not even watching it. Who knows? Oh, man. What's new? I, like, my video for this Saturday, I'm slightly terrified I might not get it done. It's been a tail end of a, like, ultra hell week at work. So last week was, like, super, super busy. I worked throughout the weekend. I was answering messages from my boss's boss at, like, 9 p.m. I was like... yeah, no hat day. I know, right? Like, that's how you could tell I'm completely disorganized. I was actually on a voice call with my headset, and I don't like to wear my hat with when I'm using my wireless headset, because it feels funky. And I knew I was going to be on that call, so I left my hat downstairs, and then, as one would expect, all that stuff finished, and now I'm here. So, wild and free with the silver going on up in this joint. Oh, man. Alright, so we'll do a couple of quick comments because I think some are awesome. Kingfisher's Catch, I really want to share what my wife got me for Valentine's Day. It's a t-shirt with "Ask Me About Aquascaping" on it. I'm just waiting for the poor sucker who asks. Oh, man. Okay. I will tell a story. I haven't been using my Instagram as much lately because most of the time I haven't had. I just like my Instagram previously was a lot of like me kind of doing quick pictures in the morning or maybe evening, depending on what I was doing for the day, and putting them up just kind of raw, no edits, nothing crazy like that, except for the occasional thing that I found really funny that my girlfriend made, right? Well, I've been like flying out the door every morning, and needless to say, I haven't done as much as my Instagram as I used to. I need to try to get myself back in the habit of doing more. So my significant other, my lady, got me this really awesome, and it's at my desk at work now. Well, it's in the front seat of my car because I forgot to take it in this morning. But this little like ceramic thin bowl, basically, that is resin filled, and it's a little mini koi pond piece of art, right? So it has a couple little kohaku koi in it, and it's got some rocks to have like some rockscaping and stuff. It's very cool. It's something that, you know, it's little thoughtful things like that I really appreciate, right? Really awesome. And I was trying to post it on my Instagram, and apparently I hit some wrong button because it like mass direct messaged people who follow me. And I hate when other people do that. So now that I've accidentally done that, I feel like a complete jerk. So if you're one of the ones watching and you got that, and even for those who like responded with nice words, thank you, I appreciate that, but I'm so sorry. I totally did the wrong thing in Instagram. That's just I haven't been actively using it enough, and I fat fingered something like a dum-dum, and instead of doing just a standard post, which is what I prefer to do on Instagram, I sent it out. But hopefully people thought it was cute, because I like it a lot. So it goes. I have only like 3 little things that are personal at my desk at work. I don't really usually keep a lot of things that are personal at work. So I have this like little miniature figurine of Bob Ross. Because every time something's going a little astray, I just try to remember, you know, happy accidents, soothe out, calm down, let Bob inspire me to chill. Now I've got my pond, and then I have this little figurine of a cockatiel, and The story behind that's really simple. When I was a very young boy, I think it was my 6th birthday, my mom got me a cockatiel. So I was really into birds when I was young. And I had him for like 20 years. And he was an adult cockatiel when I got him, so we're not sure exactly how old he was. But it's just a little like cinnamon, nothing special, but just that was my little cranky old man. As I grew up and became a cranky old man, he was a cranky old man. It was pretty great. And he was just a pet that I had for a very, very long time. And so it was kind of a little way to remember that, because my significant other, her father used to really love cockatiels and kept quite a few of them. So there was kind of a thing where her dad and I have similar interest. So, little thoughtful things like that. Very, very fun. Kingfisher's Guest. Did you happen to see Chris Lukup's post about the Bob Ross tank ornament? It was a skull with moss growing out for hair, just like Bob Moss. No, I did not, but now I'll have to go look it up. I'll have to look it up after the stream. That sounds fantastic. I love Bob Ross. I used to keep him on in the background all the time when I was doing homework, or several parts of my career. I've just had Bob Ross in the background when I'm just trying to get through a stressful day. Helps make me feel a lot more chill. How can you not listen to Bob Ross and not feel soothed? You know what I'm saying? Okay, let's get on topic. I've babbled incoherently long enough. I want to talk a little bit about tech in our hobby, because I look at saltwater keepers, and sometimes stuff out in Asia too, right? Where there's a lot more tech than what we normally use in freshwater. So, I think of your atypical freshwater tank. Typically, we're dealing with smaller tanks. Most people are a 20 long or a 10 gallon, somewhere in that, maybe a 29. But usually, we're not getting too many people who are having several 55 gallons or 40 breeders, unless they're the real true crazies like the rest of us, right? The true crazies have lots of those, but a lot of first fish tank kind of mentality is that smaller tank, nothing too huge. Maybe it's a hang on the back filter, but a lot of times we'll see sponge filters and stuff like that. And really simple, right? We might have a light. It's not necessarily something super crazy. Some people use super crazy lights, but a lot of times we're looking at a pre-built kit or something simple, right? And saltwater is the complete opposite. Even newbies to saltwater, you tend to have bigger tanks. A lot of times you have a sump for your filtration system. You've got protein skimmers, you've got dosers. If you're on a reef, you have a calcium reactor. You have far more intricate lighting, right? Because you're trying to mimic all these things because of the requirements for coral growth, especially if you're a reefer. If you're doing Fowler, where it's fish with rock, it's a lot less. And because of part of the thing that keeps salt's beneficial bacteria going is a lot different than a lot of the stuff we do. It's very interesting to see the major differences. And I was sitting there thinking to myself, we don't get really heavy amounts of automation or anything real crazy like that in freshwater very often. I know there's things like the Felix that are trying to launch themselves, and you could in theory use an Apex controller on a freshwater tank, but there's nowhere near something where the normal really high-tech tank is thousands of dollars worth of equipment, right? You might have a CO2, and that's a couple $100. And you might have some good lighting, and maybe it's a few $100 more. And maybe you got a couple nice canisters, and then combined, that's $1,000, or maybe $1,500. But you're not looking at $5,000 worth of equipment. And I know this is an unfair comparison to think like a nano tank versus like a 600 gallon, but I think about my friend Darren, Rogue Aquariums. I've gone to his place a couple times and done videos. I've hung out with Darren more than that. I talk to Darren a little more regularly, and he has this immaculate 600 gallon setup, and that's just the base tank, right? There's another 200 gallons in the sump. But like, if you look at like all the controllers and all the lighting and this and that, I mean, it's very expensive, very, very expensive to do all the equipment and all this stuff. He was showing me some of the pumps that he was getting to replace his current pumps because he wasn't getting enough flow, right? This is the other part about reefers, man. Reefers are crazy, and I love them because it's so funny to watch this like almost arms race that can happen in the reef hobby, where it's like, oh yeah, so I got this pump, you can only get it in from Germany, so I had to import the thing, and it does X, Y, and Z, and da-da-da-da-da. Okay, how much that thing cost you? Oh, well, I need 2 of them. All right. And each one is $750. Like, what? And all it does is move your water. Oh, yeah, but then I also need the wave maker in the tank. And that's the this and that, and da-da-da-da-da. And, that's some other, like, crazy magnetized thing. And that's another, like, each one of them's, like, $300. And there's 3 or 4. Like, you're just like, you think about that. Now, granted, a lot of the people who do this, like these really crazy level tanks, they have one super nice, huge tank, and they go all out, and that's their dream, right? That would be like the akin of us, freshwater people, going like, okay, I'm going to build my dream fish room with auto water change and all this stuff on timers, and all my lights work together on timers, and this and that, and I'm going to keep lots of tanks to create hundreds of gallons of water as opposed to one massive system. And I suppose maybe that's like the closer equivalent to understanding the difference. But I look at some of the tech options that are more commonplace, and I wonder. Alex made me leave. Uh-oh. That's a secret history, sending folks over. I appreciate it if that's the case. Thanks, buddy. Commonplace for us hobbyists is usually like a filter, maybe 2, heaters, air, light, and that's kind of it. And then when we get into plants, like, yeah, you might have aqua soil, but maybe you're doing dirt, maybe you're just doing sand and you don't necessarily care about the aqua soil. You have your live plants, but that, and maybe rock and wood if you're going a little more aquascape, but that's kind of the akin of doing rock and coral, except coral's crazy more expensive than plants ever are. Even some of the most expensive plants have nothing on even like the mid-grade of coral, right? It's wild, the price differences between fresh and salt. But we don't look at things like auto dosers as standard equipment. Even in a high-tech planted tank, typically if someone's on an auto doser, you're like, ooh, you're real serious. It's a little, it's like, it's kind of that, it's not the norm. It's more of a, okay, all right, you, instead of driving the Ford, you want the Rolls Royce. All right. It's one of those kind of things. And I've questioned a few times to myself. I was like, why is that so much more prevalent in salt and not prevalent in freshwater? Is it a matter of, when we look at the average freshwater hobbyist, a lot of it is we're looking at a nano tank. We're trying to do this as a more entry-level thing. It's not, we'll look at like spending $3,000 on a tank is super daunting, and that's like a nano ADA setup, right? Where it's like, well, if I can do this for a few $100s, that's not so bad, right? Because then I get to enjoy a pet, all those kind of things. I wonder if maybe that's part of the thing. Or 2, it's, hey, Aquaman, it's because we're poor. Yeah, but, there's a lot of people who they save up to do these things. And I think one of the other things might be that it's less common because it's so much easier to breed fish in the freshwater hobby. And this is where I actually think that the real change comes into play. Because it's so much easier to breed fish in the freshwater hobby, I think a lot of times, those of us who get pretty serious about our fish keeping, we're looking at like, okay, I want to breed lots of species of fish. And in order to do that right, I need dedicated tanks for each of these. And you're not going to spend like $10,000 a tank in order to breed fish, right? When you know, like, well, I really only need a sponge filter, a simple light, and even sometimes that simple light can go across multiple tanks, right? But I can breed fish, and I can breed this fish in this tank, and I can have my guppies and this pleco together here. Maybe I've got something else in shrimp over here, whatever those may be, right? And I think that actually might be one of the main differences in the freshwater hobby that makes us avoid this like insane cost when it comes to equipment. I'm curious what chat thinks about that thought process, because that's what's in my head, and I wonder. One of you sneaky spammers, your last name is my first name. Well, John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt, Rico Stan's got you handled. Anybody gets that terrible reference, I appreciate you. I'll do some stuff too. Why not? The other thing I think is, in the case of certain pieces of equipment that are super common in the saltwater hobby, let's. Hi, Alex. Sorry, I just read Alex's hashtag. Things like the my brain just went out to left field and totally forgot. The stupid reactor. Protein skimmer. And things like the protein skimmer, it actually is required, effectively speaking. There are ways to make these things work in freshwater, but it takes a lot of work, and usually it's only on really large, super overstocked koi ponds. It needs the higher density to the water because it's salt water as opposed to fresh water in order to actually function correctly, right? In order to create all that foam and stuff by using air and the way that it does things, the density of the water being salt water, it's just more dense. It allows for certain functions to occur more freely. I think part of that is also in the case because, like, protein skimmers would be amazing if they were easy to set up in freshwater. But because getting it to function the way it does in saltwater is extremely difficult in freshwater, we don't see them. Because it's not something where you just go, oh yeah, just like every tank can run this just because that's how the water works. Right? And Aquaball saying, I have bred many fish. I only have 65 freshwater tanks. I agree with you. I only have 65 freshwater tanks. Oh, that's the dream right there, man. I have like 18 now. I've torn a bunch down, and I'm like, one day, I'll just have this one glorious room full of water. A literal hazard if things go catastrophic to my home, but I don't care. Oh man. So that's kind of like some things that have been rolling around in my head about tech. I'm curious I'm gonna dig through chat for a second and see what chat's comments are. Other than just like people being super nice to me, which I greatly appreciate. And don't worry, I'll get your questions. Don't worry, we'll get to those. Adele Sandry, I was almost in tears just trying to program my new light timer. And I think that's an interesting thing. Maybe some of it is freshwater is more appealing because it is more simplistic. And because there's not this like crazy technology like requirement in our head when we look at freshwater, it naturally appeals more to people who don't want as complex a setup. Maybe there's that too, right? That could be another thing that we're not thinking about, is that natural kind of human psychology of like, that seems really difficult. I only really need a filter, a heater, and light over on this one, and maybe some air. That doesn't seem so bad. I bet I could keep I could keep my bed of fish in a tank and do it right and not keep it in a fishbowl. Or maybe I want to keep some angels or some tetras or whatever that person decides, right? Maybe they want glowfish for their kid because their kid thinks it's the most amazing thing in the world. Like some of my ladies, nephews and niece, they saw like one glowfish in the house. They're like, I like this one. I'm like, that's the most fake one in my house that I adopted. But okay, you love it, and I'm not going to stop you from appreciating it because you're young. You'll learn. I'll teach you in time. Paul Saltero, I think the only advanced tech that I use in my tanks are Wi-Fi timers, a UV sterilizer, and heater controllers. Everything else is run of the mill. Yeah, that's the thing. I think UV sterilizer is kind of like the most high-tech, semi-common thing that we tend to see in freshwater. And even then, like, it's not actually like all that technical what it's doing. I think your CO2... like building a CO2 reactor instead of a diffuser is probably technically more high tech than a sterilizer, or at least minimally speaking, the same level of technology. Although the science behind it could get interesting, right? But yeah, it's interesting. Desert fish creeper. I know it's not saltwater level, but I think I spent about 4 to 5K on my freshwater 75 by the time I got substrate and plants in, and I don't have a sump. I think you have to have a pretty sweet setup, Desert Fish Keeper, and I think I need pictures. If you spend 4 to 5K, unless it's rimless, because I can understand those rimless low iron tanks get very expensive very fast, and a 75 is probably like easily $2,000 on its own if it was brand new. Those tanks are very expensive, but man, are they pretty! Man, are they pretty! I will say this: I'm that person who I would much rather do acrylic over rimless, but I totally understand the appeal of like the open top rimless tank, but I keep rainbow fish and rainbows like to jump. So having these nice lids built in is just very appealing to me. Because, you know, my fish are not so bright. They see food and they get really excited and they want to leap to get that food. And then they find there's no water where they leapt. And if I'm not there, or they just thought something was food on the top of the water and went for it anyway, dum-dums, if I'm not there to save them, it's game over. All right. Rosie, thank you very much for the super chat. Alex, thanks for sending Rosie over. Random side story. My next door neighbor was temporarily housing a shelter dog named Rosie. It was the sweetest dog in the whole wide world. She got out of her backyard and was running around to all the neighbors' houses, just checking stuff out, sniffing, being a dog, right? She's young. I think she's only like a year and a half. She's a very young pup. And Rosie's seen me plenty of times out walking Shantoto, one of my dogs, right? And she gets all hyper excited, and Shantoto loses her mind, and they would greet each other up until Rosie finally got adopted. And this particular day when Rosie got free, my next door neighbors are both in the medical field, so they work quite a lot, and they have somebody who comes over and checks in on their dogs and does some like housekeeping stuff for them, because they work a ton. They don't get as much time as they'd like to. And she comes out and she's like, "Have you seen Rosie?" And I'm like, "I actually just saw her. I was gonna go try and get her, but I'm pretty sure if I just call for her, she'll come running." And she's like, "Oh, thank you." We both went to the end of the driveway and just like calling, like, "Hey, Rosie, come here, baby." And she just comes booking across our little cul-de-sac that I live in, and it just slams like right into my legs, just like, pet me, human." Just sat there petting the heck out of her, and then kind of gingerly just got her collar, kept petting her, like, "I got her, you want to bring the leash over?" But anyway, just reminded me of that very, very sweet pup, and I'm glad that she got adopted. Now she has a happy home to take care of her all the time. Somebody who works from home, which is perfect. Alex from The Secret History, for building the wall o fish, aka the Rainbow Room. P.S. Glowfish got into the wild in Brazil, and everyone said they die instantly. Turns out, no. I saw I think someone in the club linked that, if I remember correctly. I didn't get a chance to read the article because it was basically flying all over the place at work today, but I need to, because it almost directly impacts the stuff with like the Lacey Act, right? It's things like this are what make things like the Lacey Act happen. Whew. That's bad news bears. Lumpy Dog. I think my indoor plastic tote ponds with box filters are pretty high tech. They even have clamp-on work lights. Salty got nothing on me. Oh, Lumpy Dog, you are always there for a good chuckle, sir, and I appreciate every time you're here. Oh man. All right. So yeah, my topic was short tonight, but I kind of want to propose a couple thoughts that were in my head as to why I think there's some differences. Which is one, in freshwater, it's way easier to breed fish, right? And we kind of get in that mentality. A lot of us, especially, are like, can I breed fish for profit, or at least breed enough of them to offset the cost of my hobby so I can keep feeding my addiction with more fish? And two, maybe there's just a natural mentality that we look at the complication that is saltwater, and that inherently turns a lot of people off. They just go, man, freshwater seems simpler, so we don't try to push the boundaries with that technology. There's some companies out there, right? Like Felix is trying. I don't know how well that's going for them, but I tried to help them, and they denied my free professional experience. So, yeah, you know, what do you do? Okay, I'm going to get to some of the questions. At Bentley Pasco makes it super easy for me to see things, and if all else fails, Rico Stan is posting my email in chat. I'm way behind on email. I'm going to try to get caught up soon, as I know I think I'm 3 weeks behind right now, because I've been in the super march at work, big delivery, working way more than usual, and just I get home, and I had a couple nights where I got home at like almost 9 o'clock at night, I think. Basically, and just was like, ugh, brain no work. Just sit here, watch fish. Like total caveman. Just no smart Bentley was out the window and gone. Coffee, guns, and aquariums. I like that name. At Bentley Pasco, what's a high to medium light for a standard 20-gallon, 17-ish inches deep freshwater? So I would say the Fluval 3.0 plant would easily get you to high light. If you're looking for something a little more budget-friendly, honestly, I can't remember which model the Higer is. It's like the 987 or something like that. I get a lot of questions about it. I've read up on it. I've seen some other people review it. It looks like it's pretty powerful. I personally haven't reviewed it, so I can't say what's great or bad about it. But from what I've seen, a lot of people seem very happy with it. The JCMP, the most recent JCMP that I've tested, also is phenomenal amount of light at that size. Really, a lot of lights can give you a lot of light at that size. Basically, what I would avoid is the Phoenix Stingray. The Aqua Sky is probably only going to give you medium light, not high light. So if you have lower demand plants and you want medium light, that would still work for you, but you might be better off with like the Fluval plant if you want to go in a little more robustly built range as opposed to more budget-friendly lights. And if you're looking for something more budget-friendly, potentially check out that Higer. If you want to go real crazy, there's like the more entry-level versions of the Twin Star, the ones that aren't quite as expensive, that are typically just pure white light. That's fine. Keep that in mind. You don't need to have all the fancy LED colors and all that nonsense. White is all you need. White contains everything. But if you're looking to go a little more fancy, maybe you want something that has a little bit more aesthetic, visual appeal, you could look at some of the more entry-level versions of that. The only other lights I can think of, there's like a Pawfly, but I think 20 gallons are too wide for any of the Pawfly models, if I remember correctly. But they're worth checking out because they're actually, Empty Fish Tanks uses quite a few of them on some of his tanks, and they're actually surprisingly good for how cheap they are. They dim over time. My experience with my Pawfly that I used for a while, after about a year and a half or so, they start to dim and they're not quite as powerful. And that just comes down to the quality of the LED that's inside the light over time. It just loses some of its capability. It doesn't have as many hours of runtime into it because of the quality of the LED. Where if you look at something like the Fluval, or you go real crazy like your UNS Titans and stuff like that, they have a much higher quality LED diode in there that can handle a lot more hours of operation and doesn't degrade over time. It just basically will finally kind of die, as opposed to slowly dim out and die. So hope that gives you some options, kind of a little bit of everything. That's the crazy part. There's a million lights out there, and I'm sure somebody could suggest 3 lights in chat right now that I haven't even looked at or tried. There's so many nowadays. It's almost impossible to keep up. And it kind of kills me because I get requests all the time, like, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? What do you think of this? And it's like, I can't buy that many. there's so many, it's so hard to keep up. K9, I watch a lot of Reef content, and it is absolutely mind-blowing. Yeah, I watch some Reef stuff here and there. Every once in a while I watch Coral Fish 12G and see some of the stuff that if he's got one that looks particularly interesting to me. There's a couple other smaller creators. I'm trying to think of the guy's name. Oh no, I can't remember. He has a kind of snarky name, and I love it, but my brain is just floundering. So I haven't watched him in 2 months, but I watched him for a while. He has one tank, if I remember right, and it's not super huge, but it's really, really nice. Stuff like that. That's interesting. Of course, anytime my friend Rogue Aquariums, Darren, posts stuff, I pay attention to that because he's got just this amazing, immaculate setup that's huge and incredible. And even if it wasn't a reef tank, it would be a dream tank for pretty much anyone, because it's just so cool. Catch back up. Ner. I hope that's how to pronounce that correctly, and I wonder if that's your family name as opposed to your personal name there, Muhammad. Hello. Your channel has been a treasure trove. Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you for watching. Quick question. When should I be trimming newly planted plants? When I see dying leaves holes? Not necessarily. So what we want to look for in general, and a lot of my newly plants, I don't like planting them right away unless they're specifically a heavy root feeder like crypts or something, or swords, some of those kind of things. What we're looking for is new growth. What I like to do is look for at least 3 or 4 inches of new growth on a stem. And if I have aerial roots coming out up here and this is all the old growth and it's starting to die out, then I trim just right below that aerial root and I make that the first root that's down in my substrate. Now, we can try to help our plants trigger new growth by trimming them. But usually when we're seeing dying leaves, especially in new plants, that's usually the part of the plant that was grown immersed that is now converting, trying to get itself accustomed to submersed growth, so being fully underwater. And what the plant does is it consumes all of the energy that it's used to make those initial growth in order to help fuel the new growth, because it might not have a root system or the right adaptation in enough new growth to start really absorbing nutrients through the water column correctly. So this is why we typically look for some level of rooting and we try to feed at the roots early on. This is why a lot of your high-tech aquascaping channels, lots of ADA type stuff, will not recommend doing fertilization right away and doing lots of big water changes, because they're trying to get your water accustomed to get your bacteria established for your filtration, but they're also leaving just all that nutrient-rich substrate there as the only source to help fight off some algae and let those plants do their conversions and settle in. And then once they start seeing a reasonable amount of that new growth, then they start dosing the water column, because that new growth is able to pull nutrients from the water column far easier than the old immersed grown growth. That's designed basically to handle being in open air, and the roots are accustomed to being in some amount of water or riverine style systems, depends on how each farm grows. So typically we don't look specifically for dying leaves, we're looking for new growth. And what we're trying to do really is take that new growth, clip it away from the old growth, plant it down so it creates its own start, and go from there. Now, sometimes you don't need to do that. Sometimes the old growth will convert and be okay. But from my experience, for the most part, the old growth eventually just dies out, and we're reliant on that new growth to really establish that nice, healthy look that we're getting in our plants long term. Alyssa Bentley. These kind of things explain why salty guys find out you keep freshwater and think, oh, that's baby stuff. See, what's fun, though, is the really good freshwater people and saltwater people both understand that we're playing the same game. We're both playing a different version of complex water chemistry, the home edition, right? We're all trying to play at home water chemistry. We're all trying to be our own like personal like science chemist with our fish tanks to make sure that nature doesn't die. The difference is how we approach that chemistry, especially when it's the comparison of a planted tank to saltwater. It becomes a little more apparent, and you'll see some of the guys who have kept both, and they totally understand that. And then you get the snooty saltwater guys that are like, please, I have more money just in my filtration system than you have in that whole tank. And then to that, you're going to be like, yeah, but how many of those fish can you ever breed? Right? You just like talk that smack right straight at him. And you're going to be like, yeah, I mean, it'll take you a while and you'll get some coral out of there, but in the meantime, I've bred like 500 plecos, and they bought me 3 more tanks. So, we'll see who's doing right. That's if you really want to like play some games and talk some smack to saltwater keepers, that's the way you go. Because there's so few fish that can be reasonably bred in captivity in saltwater. It's very, very difficult. Very difficult. Although coral can be, which is where some people make a ton of money, man. I've seen coral go for stupid amounts, and every time I'm just like, you paid how much for that? But of course, I should look at myself and be like, well, remember that rare crypt you bought and it cost you like $75? Don't be so surprised, man. Like, I gotta humble myself occasionally and remember that I've done dumb things, spent way too much money on a plant, and then watched that plant die because it was like, nah, I don't like your tank. Like, let's go Giants. All right. Baseball or football? That's what I'm curious. Or maybe Japanese baseball. Also got Giants out there. A breeder at my local club only turned the lights on his tanks when he was in the room. He said, the lights are for the fish keepers, not the fish. That's a super old school mentality. That's like I only turn on my lights because it's to prevent algae. Probably not keeping many plants, but maybe he is. Or maybe he spends that much time in his fish room. Because that could be the opposite, right? Maybe he spends like 6 hours a day in his fish room, and then he's getting 6 hours of light regardless. Then it's okay. Under a little follow-up, my TC plants, so tissue culture, will be arriving soon, and I'm planning to start a grow-out tub using them. Can I use a simple tub with potting soil and plant them in there? Yes, you might still want a sand cap of some form or a gravel cap just to help give you extra depth. So my only concern is anytime you do some level of water change or water movement, if you don't have a cap to hold that potting soil down, it'll get up in the water column and it'll just be a nightmare because it will really interfere with the amount of light you can get to your plants. If you have the cap, you should be fine. Because, it's super nutrient rich. If you're not worried about keeping fish in there, you're only keeping the plants. You're ultra confident you're not going to get any algae and won't need some kind of algae crew. Then yeah, you basically don't have to worry about it at all. But if you do want to keep some level of algae control in there, whether that's Siamese algae eaters or some shrimp or something like that, just to make sure that algae doesn't get out of hand on you, then you basically just want to treat that tub exactly like you would any regular fish tank. The only difference is, like, your main goal is to grow out your plants, right? And maybe you only plan to have this up for a few weeks or a month or whatever that may be. But still, better safe than sorry to have a little bit of a cap, just some easy play sand or some gravel that you can reuse goes a long way. Goes a long way to keep it clean and easy and make it simple. Planet Tanks, good evening. I'm exhausted and just left econometrics class. So, when I was in college, way back in the Stone Age, so when I first got out of high school, one of my very first quarters in college, when I was kind of trying to figure out what I was going to do, I had a medieval history lecture class, 2 days a week, 2.5 hour long classes that started at 6 a.m. So Tuesdays and Thursdays, I would get up at 4:30 in the morning, get everything done, get to school, 6 a.m. to 8:30 in the morning, medieval history lecture class. I loved every minute of that class. My professor was amazing. That guy had a gift for explaining, like, complex medieval history and how a lot of it is spurned by various religions and all kinds of stuff, but had a gift for making it super easy and consumable and fun. I absolutely love that class. I learned more stuff than I think I ever needed to know about medieval history. Tom Gallagher, I have 4 tanks. Works great for me. Can't handle more. Hey, man. Not all of us want to go crazy. Sometimes I wish that I had exercised more restraint and just had like 5 really huge tanks instead of like 20. But at the same time, then I probably wouldn't feel like I was doing it right, because I love the 40 breeders so much, and I probably will have a garage full of almost nothing but 40 breeders. Secret history. I have Bentley. I will help you untear down this wall of fish. Ah, man. When I can get to it, I can't wait. I cannot wait. Kingfisher's Catch. I feel like a lot of high-tech setups breed a keeping up with the Joneses culture. I need to read this correctly. English. There's always a shiny new toy. Granted, the science and manufacturing behind it can be fascinating. I feel like most commonly the new toy is almost always a light. Or it's some new fancy plant. But I got okay. You know what? Really, it's probably in the hardscape, because I swear, like, there is an arms race when it comes to, like, I have the newest, coolest stone or wood, and it costs me X million billion dollars a piece. And it's just like, woo. I see some of that stuff, and I'm like, that's cool. But I can go to a rock yard and get, like, Mexican River stone for, 39 cents a pound or whatever. Get it dirt cheap. It looks great, and it comes out of actual water systems, not like a mountain or a quarry. But then again, I have a bunch of that stuff too, because I've bought random stuff when I found good deals. Mostly through Lifeguard Aquatics. That place sells stuff cheap when you catch the right sale. Planet Tanks. I have a water box 4820. Yeah. I have 2600 new already. Beautiful Dutch style, full of new rainbows. Hey, as long as you're happy with it, that's all that matters. All that really matters in our hobbies is that we are happy with it. Because you could show it to somebody else and they could be like, Dutch style or whatever, right? You get those people who get snobby about whatever they're interested in. You get like wackos like me who are like, man, that's pretty cool. I don't think I could keep up with the maintenance of all those plants, and my rainbows are probably beating that nonsense up. So I just let my plants do their thing, and people think I'm like super good at something for some reason, even though it's just basically put plant in place, allow plant to grow. Plant looks lush after 2 years. It's like one of those things. I take such a like casual approach to things. My only gift, I'm going to put that in big quotation marks, it's mostly a trial and error, has just been enough time screwing up that I've learned how to like do things right enough to make my plants be very healthy over a long period of time. That's really the only thing I'm good at. And babbling like an incoherent idiot. That's why we're here every Tuesday, right? Just listen to my crazy person babble all over the place. Oh, man. All right. I'm almost caught up to chat. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. Oh, no, chat jumped. I'm way behind chat. We'll see. We have more salt-focused stores around here than fresh. And, that's another thing. You'll get regional stuff that is way different, right? You'll get like the parts of the United States that are really into African cichlids because their water just naturally makes it way easier. And you get like parts of the Northwest where like we basically have nothing in our water. So it's very easy to keep a lot of the soft water fish like your tetras and your corydoras and your discus and your angelfish, because your water just naturally is more set up to handle those kind of things. And we have to do lots of work to work on other things, right? So, and I think you'll have that. I think you'll have places that have more access, probably because they're in a port, right? Are going to have a little bit more saltwater stuff, or maybe just in areas that might be more naturally affluent, you might be more likely to see saltwater stuff. So if you get to places that are like big tech hubs, And also it can depend on the culture. So um, certain people from certain backgrounds are more into freshwater than they are saltwater, and vice versa. Like freshwater fish keeping is far more common in Asian cultures than it is pretty much anywhere else in the world, right? And you will see like the things like your Asian arowanas and some of your stingrays and that kind of stuff is way more prevalent in those cultures because it's more common in those societies too. Like you go to Hong Kong fish markets, you can see all that kind of stuff all over the place. But you also see blood parrots, you see this, you see salt, and you see that, and you see everything under the sun. You go to Japan, and it's more common to see the nicely aquascaped fine things or koi, and going like the pond route, right? You have kind of like this dichotomy of two things. So certain places are more likely to have certain things. I totally think that can play some influence too. Dustin Perez. Oh man, I missed the stream. Hi Bentley. Hi Dustin. Don't worry, man. There's always replay. Always be part of the replay crew. Is there a test kit that tests the amount of nutrients for plants in water? I mean, you can get individual kits to test like your nitrates, and some places have more intricate testing where you can test a lot of stuff, but in general, that's kind of, you can equate some rough things by looking at your nitrates, your nitrites, your ammonia, and then your general hardness and carbonate hardness. That kind of gives you a rough idea, but it's not going to tell you like you have exactly X parts per millions of all these micronutrients in your water, right? That's where you don't necessarily see that very easily. I'm sure there are some like super crazy kits out there, probably more in Europe than necessarily in the United States or Canada, but there's got to be some stuff out there. Got to be some stuff out there. Too Cooley for Schooly. I love that name. So many of you have such great names, and like I look at, or it's just my generic name, and I'm like, even though my name's weird, I know, but I'm like, man, I should have had a good fish name instead. My Borneo Loach finally just nommed on Summer Pashy. Victory. I am so happy. Sorry, had to share with someone. This has been stressed for a long time. Hey, sometimes you just gotta starve them enough to where they're like, fine, I will eat something. And then they eat it, and they're like, this section is not so bad. Maybe have a little bit more of this. I've seen it too. I've seen fish that are super picky. For a long while, my Leopoldi angelfish would only eat spirulina flakes. They would not eat anything else, unless it was like frozen food or live baby brine. But any other prepared food, they wouldn't touch. It took a while to get them into other stuff until finally, like, I got to like extreme krill later, and then they just devour that stuff the second it hits the water. They were so picky when I first got them, but granted, they were wild caught, so they were a little. It was just the one thing that they tolerated at the shop, and I remember Robert at Aquarium Co-op was like, "Yeah, the one thing they eat a lot of is the Zoomed spirulina. They'll eat that no problem, but everything else they won't eat anything." I was like, "All right, well, I guess I'll get a thing of the Zoomed spirulina." And just slowly try to wean them off of it, or just mix it in every once in a while. I don't know. And then I ended up loving that Zoomed spirulina for quite a long while. Things you learn randomly because your fish are picky, right? Bob Purcell, any boosts or anubias that do well in higher light area? I have some wood that I'd like to attach some epiphytes to in a CO2 tank. Not a fan of moss. Thanks. Yeah, oh, totally. So, any of your white anubiases or your super small leaves, so like the pangolinos and those like super tiny leafed anubiases, those actually all do very well in high light. Boosts, well, I got good and I got bad news for you. Good news is like 70% of boosts actually prefers high light. Bad news, it will get some algae on it, but it still does well. So a lot of the finer leaf stuff, so you're like your Catherine A's and those kind of things that have the longer, thinner leaves, those do really well in highlight. The bigger leaf stuff tends to like a little less intensity of light, although usually it can still do very well in intense light. So you could look at some of like the Godzilla Kadang Red, for example. That does very well in highlight, and it's a relatively common one. What else is there? I'm trying to think. Any of the... I wouldn't do the brownies. Most of the brownies actually kind of do better in lower light. But the smaller the leaves on a boost in general, the better they do in higher light. It's kind of an easy rule if you want to go that route. Any of the red boosters also tend to like stronger light. So anything that's got a decent portion of red in its leaf usually does well under stronger light. Woo! The chair is creaky. It's almost Dan's fish level noise. Need more chair squeak. Johnny at Dan's Fish. Speaking of, I went out to Wyoming for 2 weeks and came back to my planet tank being bright green. Love the green water, but the tank I want it in. They give me not the tank. Yeah, there it is. There's a correction. Not the tank I wanted it in. Oh, man. Green water. The dream. The dream. It's the dream food for all my baby rainbows. Sweet, sweet green water. Paul Saltero. You say that about 40 breeders now, but wait until you get a look at the 60 breeder. Just saying. So, can I have some serious comment about that. Oh, man. I see some emotes in chat. Oh, geez. And chat jumped again. That's how far behind Bentley is. So, I like the 60 breeder, but I don't like that it's 4 foot. I like the 3 foot tank of the 40 breeder more than a 4 foot 60 breeder. And let me explain why. Racking. It is easier to find really good racking that holds 2 40 breeders side by side really efficiently than it is to get something that properly holds a 4 foot tank or multiple 4 tanks in comparison for the amount of weight that it has to tolerate without bowing. So if you're doing tanks in mass, and especially if you're stacking them, say like 2 high, it is actually much easier to find really strong racking for 40 breeders than it will be for that 60 breeder size. If your goal is density, 40 breeder is your friend. Now, if you just want a bigger footprint, that 60 breeder is pretty nice. But it's also kind of expensive. It's kind of expensive. And I don't think they make enough of them yet to where it comes in really affordable when it's like the 50% off sale. When dollar per gallon happens, because dollar per gallon now is only up to 29, then you get tanks that are 50% off. And the 40 breeders still come in at a pretty reasonable price when that happens, where the 60 breeder, I imagine, will not be quite as reasonable. I'm not sure yet. I haven't seen them in person. I've seen pictures and went, I bet that thing looks really amazing in person. So, we'll find out. Bob Purcell, did the puppy steal your hat? Or maybe Danger Noodle. No, I was on a call for work from home with my headset. And I don't like wearing my headset on my hat. So I left my hat downstairs knowing I had that call. And then my call ended. I had like 10 minutes to get ready for stream and realized like, oh, my hat's downstairs, but I need to set up like my light, make sure that my audio and video work fine. I don't have time to go grab my hat. Guess this is how it is, man. Secret history living in your aquarium. I just did a video tour of a 40-gallon saltwater setup with $4,500 of tech and auto dosing on it. I was speechless. Yeah, that sounds like saltwater, all right. I've seen some crazy nonsense. Crazy nonsense. At some point, Alex, I gotta get you to meet Darren, Rogue Aquariums, because like his setups are crazy. It is just like apex controlled and all this stuff and all this like all the top of the line things, like all of the best possible equipment you can have. Basically, that's what that guy does. That's his jam. Is making the absolute most amazing, immaculate setup, and all his setups are crazy nice. All right, son of a quack. Most of my plants grow great, but some of my stem plants I've cut, or plants like my bacopas get staghorn algae, while the rest just get regular hair algae, even with good light. So, usually, the enemy of staghorn algae is flow. And what's most likely happening is you don't have enough, and it doesn't have to be a lot, it doesn't really take a ton, but you don't have enough flow going through your stems to prevent that staghorn algae from being able to form. Because of the way staghorn branches and all that stuff, it really can't form correctly when there's some okay flow, and it doesn't take much, like I said. But it takes more than like a sponge filter, if that makes sense, right? You need some flow, but you don't need to be like a river system. Now, your hair algae those do just fine. So it's kind of like the opposite. So what's most likely happening is some of the areas where you have that hair algae, they're actually getting a little bit more flow compared to the stems. The stems are probably blocking a lot of that flow, and it allows that staghorn to propagate and do well. Now, that's not 100%, that's just a guess, but that would be one of the first things I would try to address, or try to figure out a way to fix by repositioning some stuff or something like that that might be able to help that kind of resolve itself naturally, if you will. Try to catch up to chat. Omar, I thought the opposite was true of big leaf boosts wanted more light. So in my experience, most of my larger leaf boosts do just fine in lower lights. Some of them do appreciate high light, because some of them really only properly survive in immersed grown setups, like Skeleton King is an example. Skeleton King is not meant to survive underwater submerged. You can get it to happen, but for the most part, it does way, 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 way better out of water. And then it gets stronger amounts of light and all this kind of stuff. Underwater is where we start dealing with algae under high light. Kind of like what you deal with bigger leaf Danubiuses, right? But from my personal experience, most of my large leaf Danubius, and not that I've kept like millions of different species or anything, I've kept 5, all have done fairly well in medium level light or lower. Whenever I give them high light, they tend to get coated in algae, and it becomes a lot harder to keep them clean and looking really nice. Just, that's my experience. I also will fully say that when it comes to boosts, I am nowhere near an authority. There are people who know way more about boosts than me, and if they tell you otherwise, probably might be better to listen to them. You guys like Eric Lucas down at BuyPetShrimp.com, Balin Shaw, if you ever watch a presentation from him, he actually has direct boost-specific presentations. He's very, very knowledgeable about boosts. He's a big boost fan. And there's more. You're going to get your folks like Kara Wade, Karen Randall, the people who've gone and like live collected these things out in Borneo and stuff like that. They know more, by far. But in my experience, most of my larger leaf boosts has all done pretty well at about the medium light and lower levels. They haven't ever really done and thrived in highlight scenarios. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm weird. And or lucky. I'll take both. But there's used to be a motto in Magic Gathering: better lucky than good. Because the guy who draws super lucky is going to beat the guy no matter how good the other guy plays. Well, Omar, I'd be curious to know where your shop's at. I don't travel much, so that could get really difficult because I'm not a big traveler. Most of that's because of my work. Speaking of Rogue Aquariums, the man is here. Darren, good to see you, buddy. Good to see you. Bob Purcell. So instead of $10 to $20 per gallon to set up, it's more like 100 to 200 gallons for salt. Yikes. Yeah, I've seen some salt stuff that is crazy expensive. But then again, there's the level of technology going like to the moon in salt is way more prevalent than it is in freshwater. You know, you might have a really expensive light in freshwater, but like every part of the saltwater ecosystem is like, oh yeah, no. There's entry level stuff, and then there's like the super nice stuff that just never dies or does XYZ or some other fancy doohad and doohickey, right? But yeah, it's, you know, you get some crazy nonsense that goes in there. Dusk 194. Tank size is fairly irrelevant. A controller, DC pump, battery backup, a calcium or calc reactor, good skimmer, a few dosing pumps. We've hit a few grand just there. Yeah, I mean, it's so easy to invest a ton of money into saltwater. But the thing is, saltwater it's always been a very complex thing. So it kind of almost makes sense that it's even more technologically complex. Where freshwater is it's a little more simple, a little more easy. Paul Saltero, I only rack 20 longs. All the other tanks are on individual stands. The reason why I like the 60 is the 4-foot length with reasonable depth so I can keep fish that I need swim space for. Yeah, no, I totally understand. For my purposes, like, space is a concern in some cases, and other times it comes down to, like, when we talk about the fish room that I'll eventually build, it is easier to get really high quality racking that can handle 2-3-foot tanks than it is to get something that will reasonably account for 4-foot base tanks. Because otherwise I'd look at something like 75 gallons being more prevalent in the fish room I want to build. But instead we'll get more mileage out of 40 breeders. Just the way it is. It's the way it is. The way it is. Byron Wang. Any experience with Xyrus? I have some delayed in the mail and expecting it to show up. Kind of beat up from shipping. Planning to keep it put nicely lit spot. I need to see it. I know the name, but I have to see the leaf structure to remind myself. So, like, say Xyrus species red, for example. Oh yeah. So this stuff is very, very, very much like Aereo column. You basically treat it almost exactly the same as Ereos. It tends to prefer more intense light. It really likes CO2. If I remember right, it divides almost exactly the same as Ereo does. Easy peasy. Easy peasy. Just has slightly different leaf structure, but otherwise treat it almost exactly the same as an Ereo. Oh, yeah. Head rogue. Then you can get on the next level with a Neptune system. Yeah, you're a crazy man, Darren. We know. Omar, my shop is in Nanuet, New York. Has been up and running for 37 years. Congratulations. Congratulations. Just to the owner, please send my congratulations. Because getting a fish store to last that long nowadays is so hard. So hard. I've been working there almost 5 years. And bought it roughly 7 months ago. Oh, so you bought it from the original owner. That's super cool. Super cool. It's kind of cool to see folks who work at a place and then take them over and have the passion and love like the original owner. Because like in the restaurant industry, for example, you almost never see that, right? There's always changes and this and that, and unfortunately, a lot of times it comes down to like, oh, how can we save on cost here and there, and they can get worse. Where I think in hobbies, especially like the pet hobby, the fish hobby especially, people who are going to open a store love their hobby. Because it's like game stores. You don't open necessarily a game store because you think it's going to make you a millionaire. I mean, you might get lucky, don't get me wrong. But you do it because it's something you love and you want to share that passion with other hobbyists. I respect it, man. If I'm ever out in, I mean, what? Let me see. Let me look up what part of New York that is. I don't know if I'm going to be in New York anytime soon, but I'm talking like upstate or kinda. All right. I got a feel for where you're at. Got a feel for where you're at. Who knows? I'd be interested. If I know I'm going to New York, I might try to make a pit stop. Just put that out there. I'll remember. Don't you worry. Don't you worry. Things like that interest me. Little stuff like that. It's been around for a long time. I always like to walk in and see why. Because I've seen a lot of my local fish stores that have been around for a while struggling. And they just haven't adapted and adopted changes that will help them continue to change with the times, right? They just try to stick to the same old. It worked in the 70s. It worked in the 80s. And it's like, it's not the same anymore. It's just not the same. Very rarely does the thing that's been doing the same thing, at least in the fish hobby, since the 70s, work today. Because just the way that so many things in that industry have changed. Alright, Son of Quack. Sadly, my Bacopa is right next to the flow. Doesn't get too bad, but it looks like little pieces forming. Also, do you heat your tanks via heater? A bit nervous after hearing some stories. So, some of my tanks are heated with heaters. Other tanks, I heat the room. So, the ones that I heat with heaters, I like the multiple heat, lesser powered heater mentality whenever possible. So, like my big retirement tank, that's 135 gallons, and it has two 200-watt heaters in it. And I have one set to like 78 degrees and one set to 74. And almost always that thing sits at about 76 degrees on the nose. Because of the amount of flow and how it has to work and all that kind of stuff. It just works just right. Moonboots. Father Fish ran his store for 75 years. He was 6 years old when he inherited it. Seems a little sus, but I don't know about inherited at age 6. There wasn't other family helping out or anything? I'm just curious. Like, I don't know. I haven't talked to Father Fish a lot. I know he ran his store for a long time, and his store had been around for a long time. And his store was super interesting. I'm kind of sad it disappeared, but, I'm not in that area. So, and I've had limited interaction with Father Fish, and a lot of it is just like, I only have so much time to peruse all of YouTube, so I'd check in with his channel, like, every few months. I'd watch a couple of videos or get a gist of what, like, his content was at the time. Go, okay, that's what he's up to, cool, and move on. Like, that's just how I watch a lot of channels, to be honest. But yeah. I don't think you're working in a fish store at age 6, like, legitimately working. You can work. Like, I worked in my father's hot rod shop when I was, like, 6. And work meant, like, I handed him a wrench, and then he prayed that I didn't go grab another wrench and go bang on something I wasn't supposed to and put a dent in it so that he'd have to fix it. Right? Like, I worked with my dad. But, I spent a lot of time in a hot rod shop as a kid. I didn't really work in it all that much, but I spent a lot of time in it. So there's kind of a difference there, right? Not trying to, like, say that that's impossible. I'm just saying, like, were you really working at 6 years old? Might have grew up in it, but yeah. All right. And I don't want to throw shade at Father Fish. I like Father Fish. I want to be very clear. I like Father Fish. I've referenced him in several videos for a reason. I like the man. He's a good dude. Or at least my experience with him. He's a good dude. I'll put it that way. How long could the bloom take realistically? So if you're dealing with some kind of bacterial bloom, sometimes they take a month. Sometimes they take a week. They'll work out. Don't be afraid of them. They're not going to really hurt you that much. Just be patient. Let them do their thing naturally. It's just balancing out your beneficial bacteria colony in your tank. Like silent hiccups making it impossible to speak. It's the worst. Okay. Last question I'll handle for the night. Okay, never mind. I'm going to do a comment, then the question. Don't worry, nerd. I'm coming to you. Adele Sanding, Bentley. There's always primer to sand. Those toddlers' hands work well for doing door jams. So, how I knew and how my dad tested me when I was young to see if he was going to teach me everything about cars. My dad has a very firm philosophy. You start with the hardest, most boring work first. And if you can handle that, then I teach you all the fun stuff. So the very first official job I ever had in my dad's shop, I think I was like 8 years old. Maybe 10. Somewhere in that range. 8 to 10. I'm trying to remember. I'm pretty confident it was like second-ish grade. Just from the time frame I remember. My dad would probably know better. So he sits me down on this front quarter panel of a car. And if I remember right, it was like I think it was a like 50 Chev or something like that. It gives me a bucket of water and a piece of 400 grit sandpaper. About the size of a 50-cent piece. Goes, okay, son, what you're going to do is called wet sanding. And he shows me a motion about the size of a quarter with this piece of sandpaper. Always keep it wet. Always keep it wet. Use this spray bottle to spray down the quarter panel. Keep the sandpaper wet. You're going to do it like this. I need to spend this much time. It was like count to 20. in each spot as you're slowly working across. Slowly working across. So 3 hours later, when I'm done with this one quarter panel, done, and my father's eyes looked at it and instantly went, oh, we got to get this, you missed this, you missed this, you missed this. That's what I got to go back and correct. Because my dad's a master of his craft. So what do you think, son? Is that fun? No, Dad. If I made you do this for a week, would you be able to do it for a week to learn the fun stuff? I don't think I want to do this for a week, Dad. My dad was like, okay, son. And that was that. Like, he'd teach me stuff. But as far as, like, learning about cars, really learning, it was, if you're not willing to do the hard stuff, you can't learn the fun stuff. I want you to understand and appreciate the hard stuff. Because if you don't appreciate that, you won't appreciate everything. And as an adult, I appreciate these things. As a kid, I didn't want to do it. It was very boring. But I can appreciate a true and high quality paint job nowadays. Man. Oh, 62 MG midget. Woo. All right. Now, last question for the night. And then we will get rolling. Desert Fish Keeper sending me an email. All right, buddy. I'll try to get to it. Like I said, I'm a little far behind, but I'm trying to catch up. What is your opinion on adding a power head or wave maker in a tank? Mine is a 1.5 foot tank. Would having one help? So, in general, on my smaller tanks, I prefer to just get a larger filter and create more natural water flow without using a power head or wave maker. Now, I think power heads are better than wave makers or circulation pumps because there are things you can do with a power head. Like, have you ever seen a modified power head that has the little, like, pop bottle full of filter floss to do fine polishing, right? There's things like that you can do with a power head, or you can do something like the Co-op where they have their power head that hooks directly onto one of their sponge filters, and it's just extra filtration. In those cases, I do like power heads. But if it's purely for flow, just a power head and no use of extra filtration on it, I would much rather take my filter and up it to the next one up the chain. Let's say you have like an AquaClear 70 or a Tidal 75. And instead of getting that one going to the 110 or putting two 70s on it, right, to increase the natural water flow, but also the filtration capacity at the same time. I prefer doing that because for the most part, while a lot of the pumps and stuff are not terribly expensive, they're close enough in cost to like getting a used filter that's in good shape that you might as well get the filter and just add to your natural filtration capacity rather than just get some extra water movement. You might as well double whammy. Now, that being said, there are plenty of more like riverine style fish that really, really, really want flow. And in those cases, you're actually probably better off with a wave maker or a circulation pump, especially if it's on a timer, so that it runs for a little while, turns off to give them rest time, runs for a while, turns off to give them rest time, and creates kind of more of that river simulation. But if you're just looking for a little extra flow, I would much rather do that using an additional or slightly more powerful filter, because your fish will be able to find the calm spots and find the rest spots and all kind of stuff. But it adds that extra filtration capacity. Now you can like alternate which thing you're doing maintenance on, and especially if it's a hang-on back, the maintenance is probably pretty fast. So it's like I do this one this week, 2 weeks from now I do that one, 2 weeks from now I do this one, and it's like you're still doing one once a month, but you're alternating it, so they're probably not getting as gunked up, and you're still keeping a really robust beneficial bacterial colony going the whole time because only one's getting its cleaning, and you could potentially really thoroughly clean that thing and not care because you've got the backup colony in that other filter. Now, if you're using just a bigger filter, of course, you go through the same thing. Your maintenance stays kind of the same, but you just have a slightly larger room for a bigger and more robust beneficial bacterial colony. Hope that makes sense. That's what I would go with. Now, With that being said, folks, thank you so much for handling my psychotic babble. I hope you all have had a fantastic week. I hope you had a good Valentine's Day yesterday, or Singles Awareness Day for those of you who are single. You probably saved money on Singles Awareness Day, unlike some of us. Thankfully, I am blessed with a lady who doesn't like those things. So I don't have too much of a worry. But regardless, I hope you had a fantastic day. I hope you have an amazing week. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, stay awesome. I'll see you next week.